Part 14. The Liu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 131. Chapter 131. Do you dislike me very much? After heating up the meal, Tang Yu only took a few bites and hurried upstairs. Zhang Wanan took one look, jumped off the chair and followed quickly. Lin 11 originally wanted to stop her, but Lu Lin on the side said, "Let Anan go." "Mom, Dad, did something happen?" Lu Zizhu asked, lowering his head and drinking porridge. Lin 11 said nothing, and neither did Lu Lin. The restaurant became silent again. Lu Zizhu nodded, he understood. "And already know about uncle, right?" He leaned back in his chair and looked at them calmly. He thought they would tell him calmly. Lin 11 nodded and said nothing, while Lu Lin pretended to be relaxed and said, "The brat is quite smart. Nothing can be hidden from Lu Zizhu. Where is Anan? What should she do? When will I tell her?" Lu Zizhu asked seriously. He didn't want Zhang Wanan to be tortured like that. Lin 11 shook his head and didn't know what to do. "Keep it a secret, she's still young," Lu Lin replied in a low voice. Lu Zizhu nodded, stood up and left. At this moment, Zhang Wanan was lying on Tang Yu's bed and looking at her silently, while Tang Yu was looking at the opposite wall with empty eyes. Zhang Wanan poked Tang Yu cautiously, "Mom, what's wrong with you?" Tang Yu didn't move. Zhang Wanan looked at Tang Yu and suddenly felt something hot swirling in his eyes, as if it would well up in the next second. She felt very distressed seeing her mother like this. Zhang Wanan suddenly stood up and ran out. As soon as she ran out, she bumped into Lu Zizhu, who was walking upstairs. The two looked at each other. Zhang Wanan was stunned for a moment before running up and hugging Lu Zizhu. Then Zhang Wanan's tears flowed out. Lu Zizhu suddenly felt his heart tightening. He bent down, picked her up and strode to his bedroom. Zhang Wanan grabbed his white collar and burst into tears. Lu Zizhu just looked at him without blaming him too much. Lu Zizhu originally planned to put him on the chair, but Zhang Wanan said nothing and refused to get down. She just grabbed him by the collar. Her eyes filled with tears, and Lu Zizhu felt distressed for a while. Lu Zizhu was bent over like that, holding the back of the chair with one hand and the table with the other. A shadow fell on Zhang Wanan and enveloped her. "What's wrong?" Lu Zizhu was very nervous when he asked this question. "Xiao Jojo, Mom seems unhappy and ignores me," Zhang Wanan said aggrievedly and lifted up the hem of Lu Zizhu's clothes to wipe away her tears. Lu Zizhu breathed out. Fortunately, he thought Zhang Wanan already knew the truth. It turned out to be the case, then there was nothing to be afraid of. "Auntie may be tired. Let her rest. Maybe she will ignore you tonight or tomorrow," Lu Zizhu comforted him, and then like a magic trick, he conjured a lollipop from behind. "This is for you." He held up the lollipop and held it out to Zhang Wanan as if he were offering a treasure. Zhang Wanan looked at it, took it, and asked, "Really? Don't you believe your own mother?" Lu Zizhu asked, pretending to be serious. "Believe it," Zhang Wanan said in a low voice. "That's good." Lu Zizhu smiled gently and took a tissue from the table to wipe Zhang Wanan's face. "I soiled your clothes. Do you dislike me very much?" Zhang Wanan twisted the hem of Lu Zizhu's clothes. "No, but I would definitely dislike this if it happened before." Lu Zizhu looked at Zhang Wanan and answered calmly. "Why did you dislike it before? Why don't you dislike it now?" I don't know either." After speaking, Lu Zizhu straightened up, leaving Zhang Wanan there in a daze. End of this chapter. The Liu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 132. Chapter 132. Love Letter. "Should I bother my mother again tonight?" Zhang Wanan asked. No one answered. Zhang Wanan looked back and found that Lu Zizhu was no longer in the room, but the half-open door of the bathroom and the sound of running water gave away Lu Zizhu's location. Zhang Wanan curled her lips and said she didn't dislike it. Wasn't she going to take a shower? She was lying on the table boredly waiting for Lu Zizhu to come out. A pink corner on the table suddenly caught her attention. She reached out and took out the thing in the book and looked over it. "Two, loses who?" Jongwanan murmured. She glanced at the bathroom and saw that no one had come out yet, so curiosity prompted her to open the envelope. She wanted to see what was inside the pink envelope. When I opened the letter, I saw it read, "Hello, classmate loses who, I have admired you for a long time. Seeing that you are tall, thin, and handsome, I knew at a glance that you are the destined person in my life. Every time you pass by me, I will my heart beat for a while." Before Jongwanan had seen all the people in the bathroom come out, Jongwanan hurriedly hid behind her back, fearing that loses who would be angry if he knew that she had touched his things. But what was written in the letter? There was a lot about destiny that she couldn't understand. Who wrote the essay and gave it to loses who? Jongwanan couldn't help but think. "What are you doing?" loses who looked at her and asked. Jongwanan answered hesitantly, "No. It's okay. It's okay to wipe your face." "I'm crying like a little cat," loses who said, and wiped Jongwanan's face with a freshly washed towel. He wiped it gently and said, "You are really worthless." Jongwanan snorted, and when loses who wiped her clean, she looked at loses who's clothes in confusion and asked, "You haven't changed your clothes?" "Ah. What clothes should I change into?" loses who asked, looking down at his clothes. Jongwanan shook her head. She thought he went to the bathroom to wash clothes, but it seemed that he went to wash towels for himself. Loses who understood instantly and smiled and said, "I already told you that I don't dislike you. Do you have no confidence in yourself?" Jongwanan pouted and said nothing. When loses who put down the towel and came back, Jongwanan nervously took out the pink envelope from behind. "Look, don't get me wrong. I didn't touch your things on purpose. I was just curious." Jongwanan lowered his head and explained as he handed it over. Loses who frowned and took it, obviously not knowing what it was. After he saw the two big characters clearly, loses who frowned and rolled them into a ball and threw it in the trash can. "Just throw away things like this when you see them in the future," he said to Jongwanan. Jongwanan looked at him doubtfully and asked, "Why?" "It has your name on it, and it says it's destined in life. I don't even know what it means." "Xiao Jojo, can you explain it to me?" Jongwanan. She took his arm and shook it flatteringly. "It's fine if you don't understand. You don't need to understand. In short, just throw it away when you see it." "There is no need to give it to me," loses who said seriously. "Are you angry?" Jongwanan blinked her big eyes and looked at him seriously. Loses who smiled helplessly, thinking that maybe he was too serious and scared her. "How can you be angry if you are not angry? Did you do something bad?" No, I just took that thing," Jongwanan said and looked at the trash can. "Don't mention that thing again, just remember what I said." Jongwanan nodded seriously as he listened. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 133. Chapter 133. I only feel safe when I sleep next to you. In the evening, Tang Yu did not do what loses who said when he comforted Jongwanan. Tang Yu stayed quietly in the room that night, doing nothing and saying nothing. Lin 11 went to see her several times, and every time he saw her stunned and her red and swollen eyes, she couldn't help but feel distressed. Jongwanan tried to go in several times but was blocked by the closed door. It wasn't that she couldn't get in, but that she was afraid that her mother would ignore her after going in. Jongwanan gritted her teeth and went back to her room to read a book. She planned to see Tang Yu again tomorrow. Maybe her mother was really tired? However, when Jongwanan returned to the room, she couldn't stand reading and couldn't sleep, so she had no choice but to hug the Ultraman given by loses who and ran to loses who's room. There was no one in Luz's room. Hearing the sound of running water in the bathroom, he must have been taking a shower. Jongwon climbed onto Luz's bed, hugged Ultraman, sat down cross-legged, and began to meditate. Huh? Why don't you sleep? When did you come? Luz's asked confused when he came out. Jongwon raised her head to look at him, opened her hands and said coquettishly, I can't sleep, give him a hug. Luz's was suddenly stunned. In his memory, Jongwon rarely acted like this. He lowered his head and chuckled, walked over, bent down, hugged her and asked gently, why can't you sleep? I don't know. Jongwon rested her chin on his shoulder and said. What should I do, tell you a story? Children only listen to stories to sleep, but you can tell them if you want. Jongwon hugged Luz's tightly with her little hands. Luz's sneered and asked, aren't you a child anymore? Jongwon rubbed his chin against his shoulder and shook his head and said, no more. Why not? Luz's asked with some confusion. Because you can protect your mother only when you grow up, Jongwon said to Luz's face to face seriously. Luz's suddenly had nothing to say. He put Jongwon on the bed, covered her with a quilt, adjusted the temperature, and sat aside and said, even if you are not a child anymore, you still have to keep your childlike innocence. Now close your eyes and listen to the story. Jongwon did not close her eyes after hearing this, but blinked her big eyes and asked seriously, then can I sleep here? Luz's thought for a while and said, no, I will take you back to your room when you fall asleep. I am an older child, and we are of different genders. He is a boy and she is a girl. He is 12 years old and she is 7 years old. They can no longer sleep in the same bed because everyone has privacy from each other. It is no longer the time when we were young and didn't understand anything. Why can mom and dad sleep in the same bed? Jongwon asked unhappily, pouting. Because they are husband and wife, Luz's replied after thinking for a while. Then we can be the same. Jongwon's eyes were bright when he said this. Luz's smiled bitterly, thinking that he really didn't understand anything. Jongwon saw that Luz's lowered his head and ignored her, and she continued to say aggrievedly, I can only feel safe when I sleep next to you. Just this time, okay. Luz's raised his head to look at her and found that the little girl's eyes had become misty. Luz's pinched her face and said helplessly, it's really worthless, just one night. The implication is that she can sleep here. Jongwon instantly smiled and closed her eyes and said, Littles Huzi, let's start telling a story. Xiaozhou, Zi. Why is it not Xiaozhou anymore? Where did you learn how to use a small boat? On TV, Jongwon replied. Her teacher seems to have turned into a TV for some reason. It seems that she will have to take care of it in the future. Children should watch some cartoons. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 134. Chapter 134 is the mother bird back. Luz's shook his head helplessly, reached out and pinched her cheek as punishment and said, you are a child, you should watch more cartoons in the future. Jongwon opened her eyes and looked at him and said, it's boring. Tell me a story, Xiaozhou. Don't worry about the master's affairs. It's nothing big or small. Luz's didn't say anything more, and after thinking about it, he started telling a story. It was windy and rainy all night, and the big trees were swaying this way and that, as if they were drunk. There is a small bird's nest on the big tree, and there lives a little bird that can't fly yet. The mother bird went out to look for food and got lost, and she hasn't come back yet. The bird's nest is shaking in the wind and rain. Rocking, like a boat in the sea, the bird is cold and hungry, shivering all over. Halfway through speaking, Luz's found that Jongwon had opened his eyes. Not only was he not sleepy, he seemed to be even more unable to sleep. Just as he was about to continue talking, he heard Jongwon ask in a muffled voice, Will my mother also go out and get lost and not be able to come back? Black grape-like eyes stared at Luzes closely, as if he was particularly eager to hear the answer from Luzes mouth. Luzes moved his mouth and suddenly realized that he shouldn't tell this story. No, your mother will not get lost, Luzes said firmly. After he finished speaking, Zhang Wanan still looked at him steadily without saying anything. Luzes smiled gently and bent down to tuck the quilt for her and said, "Go to sleep, there is everything in your dreams." "Will there be a father?" Zhang Wanan asked with bright eyes. It seemed that this father could only live in her mouth and could only be heard from other people's mouths. Luzes suddenly wanted to call himself a loudmouth, as if whatever he said tonight was wrong and nothing could be said. "Go to sleep, I'll change the story," Luzes said. "If you don't change, you have to listen to this." "I want to know if the mother bird is back," Zhang Wanan said stubbornly. Luzes sighed and summed up the story in one sentence: "In the end, the mother bird came back, and she and the baby bird had a new house." "Then my mother and I will also have a new house." Zhang Wanan's eyes were filled with longing when she said this. "Can you sleep now?" Luzes asked. "Okay, but you have to come to me." Zhang Wanan patted the other half of the bed. Luzes chuckled lightly and scolded, "Little rascal." After Luzes lay aside, Zhang Wanan looked at him and smiled. Just when Luzes was about to say something, Zhang Wanan had already closed his eyes. Zhang Wanan slept peacefully that night, but Luzes was not so good. He was frozen several times during the night because Zhang Wanan rolled up the quilt all over himself. After waking up, Zhang Wanan still asked in a daze, "Xiaozi, don't you want to cover yourself with a quilt?" Luzes looked at the quilt on her body expressionlessly, and then Zhang Wanan smiled sheepishly. "I slept peacefully," he Zhang Wanan giggled. "I think so," Luzes snorted coldly. When Zhang Wanan and Luzes went downstairs after washing up, they found Lin 11 sitting alone in the huge living room. Lu Lin had already gone to work, but Tang Yu hadn't come down yet. "I thought that after surviving the hot and difficult summer, I could have fun in the cool autumn, but after surviving the summer, I found that the cool autumn was even more difficult than the hot summer." Tang Yu, who knew the truth, felt depressed for a long time. He would sometimes eat but not much, and was silent when he took her out for a walk. Zhang Wanan, who didn't know the truth, was sad for a long time because of this. She would often lie in Luzes arms and cry. Luzes could only make exceptions and let Zhang Wan sleep beside him again and again, so that not only would she be safe, but so would he. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 135. Chapter 135. Is it because I can't accommodate you in my house? Tang Yu was depressed for a little half a month. Lin 11 was worried a lot during this little half month. He didn't have much nutrition when he woke up. How could his body and bones be able to bear it for more than half a month? Until one day Tang Yu was willing to come out, eat a lot of food, and take a walk in the sun. She no longer locked herself in the room all day long. The day she woke up, she hugged Zhang Wanan tightly in her arms and cried like a child, soaking the clothes on Zhang Wanan's shoulders. "Mom misses you so much," Tang Yu said sobbingly. Zhang Wanan was also frightened and cried, but it was more of an accident and surprise because Tang Yu finally talked to her. "Mom doesn't cry, Ananze, Mom doesn't cry." Zhang Wanan repeated the sentence over and over again. Luzes and Lin 11 saw the scene and closed the door and walked out, leaving this time between mother and daughter. "Did Mom worry you?" Tang Yu asked, holding Zhang Wanan's little face. Zhang Wanan nodded, then shook her head, and then she buried her head in Tang Yu's arms. "Silly boy," Tang Yu whispered. At this moment, Tang Yu suddenly felt like a child, not an adult at all. Tang Yu, who had been depressed for a long time, suddenly became the same as before on this day. The Lu family's whole family was finally relieved and no longer worried all day long. After Tang Yu stopped being depressed, she didn't mention Lao Zhang, nor did anyone else. It was as if this person suddenly didn't appear, but everyone knew it and kept this person in their hearts. It's just that I don't say it anymore. After Tang Yu, who had been depressed for a long time, woke up, Lin 11 ordered the kitchen to make various tonic soups for her. The meals were different every day. Within 2 weeks, Tang Yu gradually noticed that there was some flesh, and her cheeks were no longer sunken. I really don't want to eat these things anymore. I'd better eat more normally like you, Tang Yu said that day with a frown and a bowl of tonic soup. She couldn't bear it anymore. Lin 11 looked at her seriously. How can this work? You have to make up for it. Tang Yu sighed helplessly and had to blow a few times and drink it. I bought a small house outside, Tang Yu suddenly said that day while sitting in Lin 11's bedroom. Lin 11 didn't react for a while. When she did, she looked at Tang Yu in disbelief and didn't say anything for a while. That's it. Seeing that she didn't speak, Tang Yu lowered his head, opened his cell phone, and sent the picture to her. No. Why are you doing this? Is it because I can't accommodate you in my house? No, that's not what I meant. I just feel that I can't always stay at your house. This is not good either, Tang Yu hurriedly explained. We didn't say anything was wrong. Why did you just? Lin 11 was so angry that she had nothing to say. I know you are a little angry now, but I really don't mean anything else. Lin 11 shook his head and said helplessly, I've already bought it, what else can I say? Do I still have money after buying it? Yes, it's enough to last a lifetime, and the value of this house will increase in the future, she said with a smile. She has saved a lot of money and wants to travel around the world with him. Lin 11 felt that she was too well prepared and had nothing to say at all, so she could only shake her head helplessly. But I still have to live here for a while. It hasn't been renovated yet, but it will be soon, Tang Yu said with an embarrassed smile. I didn't let you live here. You, really me off. You bought a house without saying a word, Lin 11 sighed helplessly. Have you ever thought about what to do with Anan? Do you want to go with you? Tang Yu was suddenly stunned after Lin 11 asked this question. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Liu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 136. Chapter 136. The Little Scoundrel. It's not that she hasn't considered Zhangwanan, it's just that the more she thinks about it, the more she worries. Tang Yu opened his mouth but said nothing. You just say it, Lin 11 said. I thought about taking her with me, but I always felt that I would be very selfish, because you have been taking care of me all these years, and then I suddenly came out and wanted to take her away. I think this is too selfish, Tang Yu said, looking up at the ceiling. Lin 11 smiled calmly and said, it's okay. Anan is just the flesh that fell off your body. Anyway, we are sisters, just like a family. Even if they are taken away, we are still a family, but we live in different places. Tang Yu smiled bitterly. She knew that although Lin 11 seemed relaxed on the surface, she could see a little bit of what was going on in her heart. It must be very uncomfortable. Yeah, how could she be such a selfish person? She had helped raise the child for so long, but she said she wanted to take it away. Tang Yu didn't know what to say. Lin 11 patted her shoulder and told her to stop thinking about it, and then changed the topic away from Zhangwanan. Be sure to tell us if you need help after you go out. Good. Lin 11 lowered his head and said no more. After a moment of silence, Tang Yu suddenly spoke up. I feel that although I am An's biological mother, after all, you have been together for a longer time, and the relationship between you must be deeper. That's not necessarily true. Anan has been very attached to you since you woke up. Maybe she likes you more, but it's not wrong to say that she has a deep relationship with our family, but it should only be for Xiaozhou, Lin 11 said. When Lin 11 finished saying this, Tang Yu and Lin 11 looked at each other and smiled in unison, just like they did in college. My mother seems to have a new house, Zhang Wanan said to Lu Zizhu while sitting on Lu Zizhu's bed at night. Lu Zizhu turned around and looked at her doubtfully, thinking she was talking nonsense. What nonsense are you talking about again? I'm not lying. I overheard this secretly at the door of my mother's room during the day, although I know eavesdropping is not good. Zhang Wanan's voice became softer as he continued. What else did you hear? Lu Zizhu walked up to her and asked nervously. No more listening, Zhang Wanan said hurriedly. She did not listen anymore, but only heard this little bit. Perhaps you heard it wrong. How can your mother buy a new house now that she is living well here? Lu Zizhu said. Really? Zhang Wanan asked. I don't know, maybe I'm talking about someone else. I'll listen to my aunt in person later, Lu Zizhu said. Okay. Zhang Wanan fell down holding the quilt and closed her eyes. Little rascal, it's almost over, it's time to go back to your room. Lu Zizhu went to poke her. Zhang Wanan didn't move, and Lu Zizhu suddenly curled up his lips and suddenly had bad thoughts. He stretched out his hand toward her round belly, and then started to tickle her. Sure enough, this trick worked, and Zhang Wanan immediately laughed. Lu Zizhu chuckled helplessly. Are you still pretending to be asleep? I didn't pretend to be asleep, ha 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 ha, I just woke up from being scratched by ha ha. Zhang Wanan finished the sentence intermittently while laughing. You little scoundrel, Lu Zizhu said helplessly and stopped tickling her, walked around to the other side and lay down. Go back to your room tomorrow. Lu Zizhu's expression in the darkness was invisible and impossible to fathom. Can't hear you, Zhang Wanan muttered and turned her back to Lu Zizhu without saying anything else. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 137. Chapter 137. The master is unhappy and wants to tell Xiao Zhu. It was gloomy when I woke up early that morning, and Zhang Wanan lay on the windowsill in a daze. When Lu Zizhu woke up, he felt that there was no one around him and he suddenly woke up a lot. If this was the case before, Zhang Wanan wouldn't wake up after he woke up and washed up, but this morning there was suddenly no one around him. Lu Zizhu hurriedly sat up. Just as he was about to look around the room, he heard a voice coming from the other side. Xiao Jojo, you're awake. Hearing this voice was like a reassurance, and Lu Zizhu was no longer nervous. He walked over and stood next to Zhang Wanan with his hands in his pockets and asked, Are you awake so early today? Zhang Wanan nodded as an answer, and then continued to be fascinated by the window. Lu Zizhu took a look and found that there was no scenery except the gloomy scenery outside the window, and she didn't know what she was looking at. Will father-in-law Sun come out today? Zhang Wanan asked, looking out the window. So she was waiting for father-in-law Sun to come out. Lu Zizhu knew it. It will rain today, so we shouldn't go out, Lu Zizhu said. Okay. Zhang Wanan felt a little disappointed, jumped off the stool and ran back to her room. Lu Zizhu met Zhang Wanan again at the dining table. Zhang Wanan sat next to him obediently with her head lowered and eating, completely losing her usual energy. When Zhang Wanan finished eating and was about to go upstairs, Lu Zizhu followed him. Why are you following me? Zhang Wanan asked without looking back when she heard the footsteps behind her. Lu Zizhu coughed a few times and asked, Don't you look very happy today? Zhang Wanan walked in front and nodded, saying, My mood is just like the weather outside. Why? I don't know either. Maybe it's because she hasn't memorized the Chinese text, Zhang Wanan thought silently, but she didn't dare to say it because she was afraid that Lu Zizhu would know that she was just having fun and not memorizing the text. Lu Zizhu took a long step and walked in line with her. Lu Zizhu patted her head gently with his big hand and said, If you are unhappy, just tell your little Zhuzi. How can Xiao Zhuzi let his master not do it? Happy, don't you think? Zhang Wanan raised her face and looked at him, her face full of shock, and she was a little bit happy in addition to shock. Zhang Wanan lowered his head and pursed his lips and smiled, "Okay, little Zhuzi, your master is very happy now." Lu Zhu smiled softly and stopped talking. When I arrived at the school gate in the morning, I saw Zhang Wanan looking at the door with a frown on her face, as if she didn't want to go in. Lu Zhu couldn't help but be a little confused when he saw that she didn't go in for a long time. "Why don't you go in?" he asked Zhang Wanan. "Well." Zhang Wanan was still thinking about what to say. She couldn't say that she didn't memorize the text and was afraid of being scolded by the teacher, so she didn't dare to go in. Then Lu Zhu would definitely dislike her, and the teacher's temperament seemed to have changed drastically recently. It was like a different person, which made her even more afraid to go in. Just when she was thinking about what to say, Zhang Baihui appeared out of nowhere. "Hainan, why don't you come in?" He walked over and greeted Zhang Wanan naturally, and then said hello to Lu Zhu. "Hi." Lu Zhu just nodded, but he was already furious. What did this kid think of himself? He actually called out Anan. But Zhang Wanan was so happy the moment she saw Zhang Baihui, regardless of whether Lu Zhu was still around or not, she hurriedly grabbed his arm and pulled him aside. Lu Zhu wanted to beat Zhang Baihui on the street when he saw this scene. Who made him appear suddenly? End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 138. Chapter 138. Why don't you dare to face it? Lu Zhu endured it again and again, not knowing what was being whispered over there. In short, Zhang Wanan smiled happily as he spoke, and then jumped up. Lu Zhu clenched his fists and was about to walk over when he realized that the person over there had already finished talking and was about to come over. When Zhang Wanan and Zhang Baihui walked up to him, he first looked at them condescendingly, which made the two children feel a lot of pressure, especially Zhang Baihui, who had never seen such a look. He was so frightened that he almost broke out in a cold sweat. "Do you have any hidden secrets to tell? That's why you stayed so far away?" Lu Zhu's voice at this moment was completely lost from the softness he usually had when facing Zhang Wanan. His voice now made people tremble. "Eh, little thing," Zhang Wanan said with a playful smile, gesturing with her fingers. Lu Zhu glanced at her coldly to tell her to shut up. Zhang Wanan glanced at Zhang Baihui and had to shut up honestly. Lu Zhu was even more angry when he found that the two people were still flirting with each other under his nose. "What did you say?" Lu Zhu asked, looking at Zhang Baihui with cold eyes. Just a little thing." Zhang Baihui did not dare to raise his head under the suppression of Lu Zhu's strong aura. "Why don't you dare to look at me?" Lu Zhu asked him after discovering this. Zhang Baihui said nothing. After a moment of silence, he slowly raised his head, glanced at Lu Zhu, and then quickly lowered his head. Lu Zhu felt a little funny when he saw him like this. He turned to Zhang Wanan and asked, "Is this the desk mate you said is good everywhere? You don't even dare to look at me." He was very jealous at this moment. But they were all young at that time and had no idea what it felt like to be jealous. It wasn't until they recalled it many years later that they realized what jealousy was like. Zhang Wanan raised her head and glanced at Lu Zhu with misty eyes and said, "I'm afraid of you." Then she took Zhang Baihui's arm and walked into the school. Lu Zhu stood there blankly, not knowing what to do for a moment. Did he make her annoying? He couldn't help but think. "Xiaozhou, you're almost late." The driver kindly came over to remind Lu Zhu, who had been standing there for a long time. Lu Zhu just glanced back, but then he saw beads of sweat emerging from the driver's forehead. Lu Zhu suddenly lowered his head and laughed to himself, then turned around and got into the car. The moment he got in the car, he saw his own face on the car window. He has an expressionless face and sharp eyes, as if he can kill people with just his eyes. Thinking about it, this shouldn't be the expression a 12-year-old child should have. Zhang Wanan walked into the classroom and sat down angrily, but after thinking about it, she felt aggrieved and had to bury her head in her arms. Yes, I'm sorry. Zhang Baihui said softly. Why are you apologizing? Zhang Wanan asked in a muffled voice. She should be the one to apologize. She should treat it as apologizing for loses who. He didn't know why he wanted to apologize. I'm useless. My father often tells me to be a man, but when I stand in front of your brother, I'm not as brave as you. Zhang Baihui hesitated for a while before saying this. He is not my brother, he is Xiao's Huzi. Xiao's Huzi is very gentle. Zhang Wanan's voice became softer as he went on, so that Zhang Baihui could only hear the front part. Zhang Baihui lowered his head, took out the book, put it on the table and stopped talking. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 139. Chapter 139 broke the little girl's heart. Luz's who was sitting on the other side of the car, was restless. He didn't know why he said that, it must have hurt the little girl's heart. The little girl's eyes were full of tears when she turned around. I wonder if she cried. If she cried, would someone comfort her? If someone did, it must not be that brat. The more Luz's who thought about it, the more confused his mind became. Uncle Li, turn around and go to an school. Luz's who ordered coldly. But you go to class quickly. Before the word late could be said, Luz's who interrupted coldly and repeated it again. The driver had no choice but to turn around. But when they went back, the bell of Zhang Wanan school had just rang, and the whole campus was filled with the sound of reading. Luz's who just glanced through the car window. He didn't know the meaning of coming here again. But this day he was late. Zhang Wanan, who was reading aloud on the other side, was also distracted, glancing out the window from time to time. Several times, Zhang Baihui nudged her with his elbow to remind her not to be distracted. After Zhang Wanan was distracted many times, Zhang Baihui finally couldn't help but asked in the sound of everyone reading aloud, "Why are you so distracted today?" Zhang Wanan shook her head and said she had something to think about, but she didn't say what it was. Zhang Baihui did not force her to speak, but only reminded her not to get distracted. In fact, Zhang Wanan knew very well what she was thinking. She was wondering why Xiao's Huza suddenly seemed like a different person. The weather has become the same as today. As expected, my mood will get worse unless the sun comes out. She was wondering again why Xiao's Huza said that his master had something unhappy to tell him, but now Xiao's Huza made his master unhappy. Xiao's Huza is such a fickle person. Zhang Wanan was just thinking about the head teacher who came over and knocked on her desk and asked sharply, "Do you want to make you stand? I have observed you several times. Is there anything good to see outside the window?" Zhang Wanan was startled by the sudden voice. She stood up tremblingly and lowered her head without saying a word, but she was complaining about Luz's who in her heart. If she hadn't been thinking about him, she wouldn't have been distracted. "If you let me see you again, stand in that corner," the head teacher continued to say harshly, but he still asked her to sit down softly. After Zhang Wanan sat down, she no longer dared to think about Luz's who. Even if she did, it was only a small thought. The first class after morning reading is Chinese class. This morning, teacher Wang arrived late again like those big-name celebrities. When she came, she was still wearing a pair of sky-high heels and a tight skirt. Although it was already autumn, she didn't seem to be afraid of the cold at all. The classmates are already used to it when she appears like this, but no one can say anything. If there is any doubt, it will definitely be a scolding behind closed doors. Teacher Wang's scolding is not the same as her carefully dressed face. Her face and outfit are nothing like her. However, it's strange that the school didn't notice her situation at all. It would be okay if she didn't find out because she kept a low profile, But this person is not as good as a low-key person. She always walks with her head held high in school. The first impression she gives people is always good, but the later she gives people, the worse the impression becomes. Furthermore, several classmates in the class have met her, and she has been arguing with the principal and several male teachers. But the children at that time were very naive and did not understand the dark side of the world at all. They only thought they were talking about work matters and then passed it by at a glance. End of this chapter. The Liu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 140. Chapter 140. I actually have opinions about her. As soon as she came in this morning, she closed the door, looked around, and then told the Chinese class representative, "Stand up and move your stool to the podium." "It's very tiring to walk," she whispered from behind. Muttering. Everyone has long been used to this situation, so they can only do as she said. Ever since her bad side gradually emerged, the students no longer like her classes so much, and they wilt every time they attend class. The class representative was scolded again for slowly moving a stool for her, and was even kicked by her with the heel of her high heel. It's not that simple to kick someone high in the sky, but the class representative didn't make a sound. He seemed to be used to it and was numb. She sat down comfortably and began to check the homework she had left. "I won't have physical education next class, I'll take Chinese instead, so I have plenty of time. I've memorized all the assignments, right? I'll check in an S shape in a while," she said lazily, staring at the watch on her wrist. Once she heard that the physical education class was cancelled and even changed to Chinese, many of her classmates made strange noises, which made her unhappy. "You're still crying like a ghost, and I'm not happy to serve you. You're a bunch of brainless idiots," she satirized those innocent children in a sarcastic way. After she said this, there was an immediate silence. No one refuted, probably because they didn't know how to refute, or they didn't dare. "Start with you," she ordered the child on the farthest side of the wall to start with her. The first child memorized pretty well, but she got impatient while listening on the podium. She took out her cell phone and started playing silly things on it. She didn't show any respect for others. She was just the first one. The children came one after another. Some children passed the test intermittently, while others took a few glances at the book while she was not paying attention and then passed it. She did not notice it at all, as if she had been cut off from all information. Suddenly, she didn't know what was going on. She threw her phone on the table in annoyance and yelled angrily, "They are carrying all kinds of things and they are all standing up." She didn't listen at all. She probably saw something on her phone that her off and she lost her temper at the children. The children's eyes were filled with fear at her sudden outburst. "Teacher, why do you ask everyone who has memorized to stand up when you have nothing at all? Some of them are very good at memorizing." At this moment, a childish but firm voice suddenly rang out from the silent classroom. Everyone looked for the sound and found that it was He Chiu. He Chiu was standing there clenching his fists tightly, as if he had been holding back for a long time. Although He Chiu is usually a little naughty, he is smart and can do well in every exam. He is good-looking and popular, so many children like him. Seeing him standing up now, other children gradually started to protest. He Chiu is like a big brother at the moment. Teacher Wang was very dissatisfied when she saw this scene. She never thought that these children, who seemed so cowardly that they could be crushed to death with one finger, would have objections to what she said. She stood up on the high ground and picked up the small dogma that had been prepared on the podium. Just in terms of aura, she was several meters taller than those children. She clasped her hands in front of her chest and walked slowly and leisurely to He Chiu, tilting her head and looking at He Chiu. He Chiu did not admit defeat and looked at her hard. The two of them just looked at each other, but the next second, Teacher Wang threw away her hand and swiped at him. She used such force that He Chiu staggered. End of this chapter.